Welcome to my channel. I am Ben. Today, we will step into the chilling world of female killers in America, and behind their faces, often smiling or calm, lies a darkness that society could not imagine. History has shown us that violence is not confined to men. Across the United States, there are women who have shattered every stereotype, leaving trails of bodies, fear, and unanswered questions. Aileen Wuornos, who lured men along Florida highways. Dorothea Puente, the seemingly kind landlady, hiding corpses beneath her garden. Judy Buenoano, the so-called Black Widow who poisoned her own family. Genene Jones, a nurse who was supposed to heal, but instead became an angel of death for innocent children. And Nannie Doss, the giggling grandmother who left death scattered among her relatives. Each of them reminds us that cruelty wears many masks. Picture this: a dimly lit room, a cup of tea steaming on the table, a grandmother's laugh echoing through the air. Yet inside that cup lurks enough poison to end a life. Or imagine the sterile walls of a hospital nursery, the sound of infants crying, and a nurse preparing an injection that would silence them forever. These are not scenes from fiction. They are real, documented tragedies that shook communities, devastated families, and forced courts and lawmakers to question how far evil can hide behind trust and innocence. Why would these women kill? Was it greed, desperation, hidden rage, or a cold desire for control? What makes a smiling face turn into the mask of a predator? Join me as we uncover the top 5 notorious female killers in modern American history. Women whose names are etched into the darkest chapters of crime. But as we peel back each layer, what we find may not just horrify us. It may challenge everything we thought we knew about the boundaries of human nature. On the lonely highways of Florida, between late 1989 and late 1990, a woman's crimes would change how America thought about female killers. Her name was Aileen Wuornos, often described as the first well-documented female serial killer in the United States. Aileen was born in Rochester, Michigan, in February 1956. Her childhood was brutal. A father imprisoned for sex offenses, who later died by suicide. A mother who walked away, raised by grandparents. She endured beatings and cold neglect. By early teens, she traded sexual acts for food, cigarettes, and small cash. At 14, she became pregnant after a rape by a family acquaintance. The baby was placed for adoption. Soon, she was forced out of the house. Homeless, she drifted and survived by selling sex. By the late 1970s and 80s, Wuornos lived as a hardened drifter, cheap motels, wooded pull-offs, the back seats of cars. Arrests accumulated, disorderly conduct, theft, weapons violations. She carried her life in a small bag and a pistol. To most people, she was invisible, a woman on the margins. Inside, resentment, fear, and rage gathered like a storm. Within a single year, 7 men were found shot, their bodies left off desolate roadways, their cars taken and later abandoned. Investigators first assumed a male hitchhiker was responsible. The idea that a female sex worker could be behind the pattern seemed unthinkable. Evidence began to speak. Pawnbrokers recorded items tied to victims. Fingerprints matched. Witnesses remembered Wuornos driving a victim's car. Her partner, Dorothea Moore, cooperated with police, urging Wuornos in recorded calls to tell the truth. By early 1991, she was under arrest. From the first interrogation, Wuornos insisted she acted in self-defense, claiming clients tried to assault or rape her. That claim ignited a debate that endures. Predator, hiding behind an excuse, or lifelong victim, finally striking back at men who embodied her pain. Her 1992 trial became a media spectacle. Cameras captured every glare, every outburst. Prosecutors painted her as a cold-blooded killer. The defense argued trauma-shaped reflexes. Psychologists disagreed. Mental illness or dangerous personality. The jury returned 6 first-degree murder convictions. Sentence: death. For the next decade, appeals, evaluations, and interviews kept her name alive. To some, she was a monster. To others, a tragic product of relentless abuse. In October 2002, at age 46, Florida carried out a lethal injection execution. Her legacy remains chilling. Books, documentaries, and the Hollywood film Monster, which earned Charlize Theron an Academy Award, etched her story into culture. Wuornos shattered stereotypes about women and violent crime. She blurred where victim ends and perpetrator begins, forcing courts, media, and the public to ask, when violence erupts from a life steeped in suffering, do we see a predator or a casualty of the world that shaped her? What makes her unforgettable is not only the 7 lives lost, but the questions left behind. She was neither simple victim nor simple villain. She lived in that gray space where humanity and horror sit side by side. And this is only our first chapter. The next woman hid death in plain sight, turning a quiet boarding house into a private graveyard. In Sacramento, California, during the 1980s, an elderly woman with a grandmotherly smile ran a quiet boarding house. Neighbors described her as kind, charitable, and always ready to help the homeless or disabled. But behind the white hair and floral dresses, Dorothea Puente was building one of the most macabre reputations in American crime. Born in Redlands, California, in January 1929, Puente's early life was harsh. Her parents were abusive alcoholics. By her teenage years, she had become a runaway and turned to prostitution. Over the decades, she married several times, reinvented herself as a caregiver, and carefully built the image of a sweet landlady, offering shelter to those in need. By the early 1980s, her boarding house on F Street in Sacramento became a haven for elderly tenants, alcoholics, and people with disabilities. She cooked meals, provided rooms, and helped residents apply for government aid checks. To outsiders, she seemed compassionate, yet beneath this facade, she had devised a deadly scheme. Puente began to kill her tenants, often vulnerable men and women with no close family, in order to steal their social security and disability checks. She poisoned them with drugs, smothered them, or let them waste away under her control. Their bodies were buried in her backyard, covered by neat layers of soil and flowers. In 1988, police first investigated when a social worker noticed a missing tenant, but Puente deflected suspicion with charm and plausible explanations. The truth unraveled in November 1988, when authorities dug into her garden and discovered the first body. One by one, more remains surfaced, until 7 corpses were recovered from the property. The media dubbed her the Death House Landlady. Neighbors were horrified. They had trusted her, even admired her as a woman who took in the unwanted. The shock deepened when investigators realized Puente continued to cash the victims' checks long after their deaths. At trial in 1993, prosecutors presented evidence linking her to 9 murders, though she was convicted of 3. The jury struggled with her age and grandmotherly appearance, but ultimately, her deception and the graves in her garden could not be ignored. She was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Dorothea Puente died in March 2011, at age 82, behind bars. To the end, she insisted she had only cared for her tenants and that others had planted the bodies. Few believed her. What makes Puente's case unforgettable is the chilling contrast. A woman who looked like a benevolent grandmother, yet systematically preyed on society's most vulnerable. She weaponized kindness, turning trust into a trap and her home into a graveyard. Her story forces us to question appearances, how evil can hide behind a smile, a floral dress, and the promise of care. But the horror does not end there. The next woman on our list was not hiding behind kindness. Instead, she reveled in her crimes, laughing even as she confessed to killing those closest to her. In mid-20th century America, newspapers gave her a nickname that seemed almost playful, the Giggling Granny. But behind that smile and laughter, Nannie Doss left a trail of death, stretching across decades. Her case remains one of the most chilling reminders that appearances can deceive. Nannie was born in Blue Mountain, Alabama, in November 1905. Her childhood was marked by poverty and harsh discipline. Her father was controlling, her mother emotionally distant. She grew up reading romance magazines and dreaming of a perfect marriage. Instead, her adult life became a series of unions haunted by betrayal, jealousy, and, eventually, poison. Between the 1920s and 1950s, family members around Doss began to die in disturbing numbers. Husbands fell ill mysteriously. Children and grandchildren perished. Even her own mother and sister succumbed under suspicious circumstances. All told, authorities later linked her to at least 11 deaths. Her method was often quiet and domestic. She used rat poison or arsenic slipped into food and drinks. Victims suffered painful illnesses that doctors at first attributed to natural causes. Because she was always present, tending to them with a smile, suspicion was slow to build. The facade cracked in 1954 after the sudden death of her fifth husband, Samuel Doss, in Oklahoma. Doctors had grown wary. Tests revealed arsenic in his system. Nannie was arrested, and soon she confessed, laughing, even giggling as she recounted her crimes. She admitted to killing multiple husbands, her mother, her sister, and other relatives. Her casual demeanor shocked investigators and the public alike. At trial, Doss pled guilty to the murder of Samuel Doss and received a life sentence. Prosecutors chose not to pursue the death penalty, partly because of her gender and age. She was sent to the Oklahoma State Penitentiary, where she lived out the remainder of her life. She died of leukemia in 1965. The media seized on her bizarre personality. She smiled in court photographs, laughed in interviews, and treated her confessions as if recounting a humorous story. This incongruity, a grandmotherly figure joking about murder, horrified a nation. Her case became a benchmark in the study of female serial killers, illustrating how domestic roles and trust could mask lethal intentions. What makes Nannie Doss unforgettable is not only the body count, but the unsettling image of a woman who blended the ordinary with the monstrous. She read romance magazines and dreamed of love, yet poisoned those who disappointed her. She baked pies, poured coffee, and infused them with death. Her case reminds us that danger can wear the face of family, and cruelty can echo beneath laughter. And as terrifying as the Giggling Granny was, the next woman wielded death not within her family, but in the very halls of medicine, a nurse who turned healing into horror. Her name was Judy Buenoano, but in the newspapers, she became known as the Black Widow. Behind her glasses and calm exterior, she wove a pattern of deception and death that spanned more than a decade, claiming the lives of those who trusted her most. Born Julius Welty in Texas in April 1943, Judy endured a troubled childhood. Her mother died young, and she spent time in orphanages and reform schools. In adulthood, she longed for security, stability, and money. Instead of building it honestly, she chose a darker path, marrying, poisoning, and profiting from death. Her crimes began with her husband, James Goodyear, a U.S. pard. Air Force sergeant in 1971. After returning from Vietnam, James suddenly fell ill and died in Florida. Doctors at first assumed natural causes, but later tests revealed arsenic poisoning. Judy collected life insurance payouts and moved on. Over the following years, more deaths followed. In 1978, Bobby Joe Morris, her boyfriend in Colorado, died under suspicious circumstances. In 1980, her own son, Michael, fell suddenly ill. The 19-year-old, already weakened by mysterious symptoms, drowned when his car sank into a river after Judy encouraged him to drive despite his condition. Investigators later believed she had poisoned him, leaving him too weak to escape the water. Again, Judy collected insurance money. Her greed did not stop there. In 1983, John Gentry, another boyfriend, barely survived when his car exploded in Florida. Investigators soon discovered Judy had been giving him vitamin pills laced with arsenic. The failed bombing attempt exposed her deadly pattern. Authorities reopened past cases, exhumed bodies, and found consistent signs of poisoning. Judy Buenoano was arrested and charged with multiple murders. At trial, prosecutors portrayed her as a calculating woman who saw her loved ones as paycheck. Witnesses described her detached demeanor. Insurance policies, toxicology reports, and the trail of sudden deaths left little room for doubt. In 1984, she was convicted of the murder of her husband, James Goodyear, the drowning of her son Michael, and the attempted murder of John Gentry. Additional evidence linked her to the death of Bobby Joe Morris. The court sentenced her to death. For years, Judy lived on death row, becoming the first woman in Florida in over a century to face execution. Appeals failed. She gave few interviews, insisting she was innocent, but never convincing the public or the courts. On March 30th, 1998, Judy Buenoano was executed in Florida's electric chair at the age of 54. It was the first female execution in Florida since 1848, and the first by electric chair since 1976. Witnesses described her as stoic, showing no emotion as the current ended her life. Her case lingers in American memory not only because of the shocking murders, but because of the image of betrayal. A mother who killed her son, a partner who poisoned for profit. She embodied the image of a black widow spinning a web of death around those closest to her. What makes her unforgettable is how she turned trust, love, and family into weapons. She used affection as camouflage, insurance as motive, and patience as method. Her crimes remind us that danger does not always come from outside sometimes. It sleeps in the next room, sharing meals, waiting for the right moment to strike. But even as Judy's electric chair cooled, another woman's crimes were being uncovered. This time, the setting was a hospital nursery, and the victims were children whose parents trusted that nurses would heal, not harm. Hospitals are places where trust is absolute. Parents hand over their newborns to nurses, believing they will be cared for and protected. But in Texas, during the late 1970s and early 1980s, one nurse shattered that trust. Her name was Genene Jones, and she became known as an angel of death. Genene Jones was born in San Antonio in July 1950. She trained as a licensed vocational nurse, working in pediatric units where fragile infants depended on constant care. Colleagues initially described her as energetic and confident, but over time, a disturbing pattern emerged. Babies who were under her watch often suffered sudden, unexplained medical crises. Doctors began to notice an unusual spike in cardiac arrests and respiratory failures in the nursery when Jones was on duty. Infants who had been stable would suddenly stop breathing or go into cardiac arrest. Many did not survive. Later, investigations revealed that Jones had been injecting children with drugs like digoxin, heparin, and succinylcholine, substances that could trigger heart failure or paralysis. Her motive, some believed, was to create emergencies where she could then save the child, gaining praise and appearing heroic. But too often, the children died. By the early 1980s, suspicions mounted. In one case, a baby named Chelsea McClellan died after receiving an injection from Jones. Toxicology reports confirmed the presence of succinylcholine. This became a pivotal piece of evidence. Authorities began to investigate her work history across several hospitals. The numbers were staggering. Estimates suggested that she may have been responsible for the deaths of more than 60 infants and children, though only a handful of cases could be proven in court. In 1984, Jones was convicted of murder in the death of Chelsea McClellan and for injuring another child. She was sentenced to 99 years in prison for murder and an additional 60 years for injury to a child. For decades, she remained incarcerated. But legal loopholes raised fears she could one day walk free. In 2017, new indictments were filed to ensure she would remain behind bars. In January 2020, she pled guilty to additional charges and received a new life sentence, effectively guaranteeing she will never be released. She will be in her late 80s before even becoming eligible for parole, making her chances of freedom nearly non-existent. Genene Jones's case horrified America because it struck at the heart of trust. Nurses are supposed to heal, to comfort, to protect. Instead, she exploited that role, turning hospitals, places of safety, into places of danger. For parents who lost children, the betrayal was unbearable. What makes her unforgettable is not only the suspected number of victims, but the setting of her crimes. She killed where trust was absolute, using medical knowledge as her weapon. Unlike others on this list who killed for money or power, her motive seemed rooted in a twisted need for attention and control. That made her perhaps the most chilling figure of all. And with that, our list of the 5 most notorious female killers in modern American history comes to a close. But what these women left behind is more than crime scenes and headlines. It is a legacy that forces us to confront unsettling truths about human nature. We have walked through the lives and crimes of 5 women whose stories still chill America. But why these cases? What makes them stand apart from hundreds of tragedies in criminal history? The first criterion is severity of the crimes. Each of these women committed repeated acts of violence, leaving behind not just one victim, but patterns of death that stunned investigators and terrified communities. The second is social impact. Their cases did not vanish quietly into court files. They dominated headlines, filled television screens, and forced conversations in homes and courtrooms. Aileen Wuornos sparked debates about justice and victimhood. Dorothea Puente exposed the dangers hidden behind kindness. Nannie Doss horrified the nation by laughing through her confessions. Judy Buenoano shook faith in family bonds. And Genene Jones forced hospitals to re-examine how trust can be betrayed within medicine. The third is legal and psychological significance. Each trial pushed the system to confront difficult questions. How should the courts deal with female killers, often perceived as rare? Were these women shaped by trauma, or did they choose cruelty despite it? These cases became studies in motive, responsibility, and the fragility of human trust. Finally, we included unique elements that made each case unforgettable. Whether it was a smile hiding arsenic, a backyard concealing graves, or a nurse's syringe turned weapon, every story carried a detail that refused to fade. These criteria remind us this is not a hall of fame. It is a mirror held to the darkest sides of human behavior. And when we face these reflections, we are left with unsettling questions about the limits of trust and the depths of cruelty. These 5 women stand as some of the darkest figures in modern American history. Aileen Wuornos, who turned the Florida highways into hunting grounds. Dorothea Puente, the grandmotherly landlady who buried trust beneath her garden. Nannie Doss, who laughed her way through confessions of poisoned husbands and relatives. Judy Buenoano, the Black Widow who saw life insurance as a path to profit. And Genene Jones, the nurse who betrayed the very heart of care by harming the children she was meant to heal. Their stories remind us that evil does not wear one face. Sometimes it hides behind poverty and rage, sometimes behind kindness and care, and sometimes behind the very roles of family or healer. Each case forces us to ask the same question: what pushes a person across the thin line between ordinary life and extraordinary cruelty? For the legal system, these women tested the boundaries of justice. Courts struggled with the idea of female killers, often seen as rare exceptions. Their trials became moments when society was forced to re-examine its own assumptions about gender, violence, and motive. Laws were strengthened, hospitals reformed, and families left with lessons carved in grief. But beyond the headlines and verdicts, their legacy is a warning. Trust can be broken, appearances can deceive, and cruelty can bloom in the most unexpected places: in the home, in the hospital, in the smile of someone we think we know. So, what do these cases tell us about human nature? Are killers born, shaped by something inside them? Or are they created by the environments that wounded them? Perhaps the answer lies somewhere in between, a mix of scars and choices. What remains certain is that the stories of these 5 women will never fade. They remind us of the fragility of safety, and they challenge us to look more closely at the shadows that pass beside us every day. And perhaps the most unsettling truth is this: sometimes the greatest danger is not the stranger in the dark alley, but the familiar face across the kitchen table.